We have in the gospel story today the calling of 4 apostles, the 4 first bishops or priests of the church, first 4 leaders. And we hear that Jesus is walking by the Sea of Galilee, and there he sees Andrew and Simon, who would later become Peter. And he says to them, "Come, follow me." It's an invitation into a new way of life, a radical discipleship. And what does it say that they do? It says that immediately they dropped their fishing nets and they began to follow Christ. I always found that somewhat perplexing, that here's this guy walking by the sea and you're working, and he says, "Hey, quit your job, give up your livelihood, no big deal, and follow me." And the guys say, "Oh, all right, he sounds sane enough, let's go." It never made much sense to me. But let's remember last Sunday's gospel, in the Gospel of John, where Jesus had already, prior to this event recorded in the Gospel of Mark, had already built a relationship with Andrew and Simon. Remember, they had that evening supper together. When you eat a meal together, right, what happens? You grow closer to each other, don't you? And so that relationship was built. They knew about Jesus. They knew Jesus was a rabbi, a teacher. And so perhaps they're very excited that he's calling us to be his disciples. Now that's a big deal. Usually the disciple would choose the rabbi to follow, but the rabbi came to them and he says, "I want you to follow me." Now what does that mean? See, when you were a disciple of a rabbi, you would literally follow him around. So you'd go with him to the marketplace, into homes, and you would listen to his teaching. You would also, most importantly, I think, observe him, learn by observation. And so that's what they're doing. But it's a radical thing because they leave behind their careers. This is a true story. They left their careers, and can you imagine the trust that had to be in their hearts, the faith to make that leap and to say, "Okay, I don't know how I'm going to eat, but I'm going to follow this man." So it was an invitation to a radical change, to follow this way of life, to follow this person, Jesus. And so that is what we have to do first. Because Christ invites us and he says to us, "Come, follow me." What does that mean as Catholic Christians? What are we called to do? We are called to follow a person, Jesus. We're called into a relationship with him. We're called to a radical way of life that entails what? That entails prayer. Because Jesus prayed every day, and he would go to the mountaintop somewhere quiet. He would go on a boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee because people were following him to have that time in prayer. It's a call to a life of worship like Jesus and his apostles at the temple, or hearing the word of God, the synagogue. It's a call to love our brothers and sisters, especially the poorest of the poor, the neglected, the vulnerable. That's the calling. It's a calling to a radical way of life that is often different than the popular culture. "Come, follow me." And then he says something very intriguing. He says, "And I will make you fishers of men." I will make you. See, it's Jesus Christ who makes them into missionary disciples or evangelizers. What does that mean? It means people who bring the good news, this new way of life, this way of love, to others. So our faith is not just for ourselves, is it? We tend to, as Catholics, just kind of stay in our own bubble, I go to Mass, maybe I say my rosary, but that's it. I don't share Jesus with others. That's not what we do as Catholics. Well, that's wrong. We need to do that. We don't live for ourselves, and Jesus says the same thing to us. I will make you fishers of men. I remember one time I was leaving Walmart, and I bought a new fishing pole. Because I'm cheap, I go to Walmart. Anyway, no, it was a good fishing pole, but anyway. And I was leaving, and I had my collar on, and the gentleman says, Father, you're a fisherman, but more importantly, you're a fisher of men. And I said, you got that right. He understood. But it's not just the priest, see. More importantly, I believe, it's the laity. You are called to go fishing. But what do we have to leave behind? Because the apostles left behind their fishing nets. But what is it that we have to leave behind to more radically and intensely follow Jesus? Sometimes it's a sin that we struggle with. You know, what do we have to get out of our lives? Or sometimes it is a career that's leading us away from Christ. Sometimes it's those around us. Maybe we have to leave those groups that lead us astray, quite honestly, to more importantly follow Jesus. Because there's a lot at stake. And then how do we bring Christ to others? Because that's important. Because in our hurting world, empty world, we need to bring Jesus. And it's not in a superior way, like we are so much better. But it's like, I love you, and I want you to experience joy. I want you to get to heaven. To get to heaven. I think some of the reasons we don't evangelize is, number one, we're afraid. We're afraid people might think if we bring up Jesus. And sometimes we think that they don't want to hear about Jesus. But I can tell you, they do. It's placed within their hearts. You know, wearing my collar in public, and like, people gravitate towards the priest, especially on an airplane. And I'm like, I just want to listen to my music or watch my movie. Please leave me alone. I don't, but But they do, and they're intrigued. They want to know more. Even if they don't understand or maybe have disagreements with the church, they still want to know. It's because it's in our hearts. There's a professional soccer player for DC United, and he's a graduate of theology courses, and he said, I'm going to go on a leap here, and I'm going to try to talk about Jesus with my teammates. And so one day he said, I'm just going to ask this question. He said, hey guys, don't you think it's weird that Christians believe that the sin of Adam and Eve is the cause for all evil in the world? Don't you think that's weird? And he's like, okay, let's see what happens. And would you believe his teammates were intrigued, and they engaged then in a 3-hour conversation about that theological concept. We just have to bring it up sometimes, you know? There's smart ways to do it, and there's ways not to do it. I remember one time I was at a bar and with my friend, and he goes right away. We sit down at the bar, and the bartender, he goes, now, are you Christian? I said, oh, Lord, have mercy. I said, I like your enthusiasm, but you got to have prudence. You know, that's not how you start off a conversation. Maybe you talk about the weather and the sports first. You know, you got to build that relationship like Jesus did, right? But then, yeah, eventually, let's say, hey, you know, what do you think about the Catholic Church? Maybe that's a good question. Don't avoid religion and politics and conversation. Those are important matters, you know? Let's engage in civil dialogue. Let's try to evangelize, bring people to Jesus, bring Jesus to people. How important. Because I think another reason we don't evangelize is because of the false concept and heresy of universalism. That we believe that everyone is going to heaven, and it doesn't really matter, right? Everybody's going to heaven, right? Except maybe if you're Hitler. But that's not what Jesus says. Jesus says the road to salvation is narrow, and few choose it. And the one that leads to destruction is broad. There's a lot at stake. And so how important is it then that we as disciples truly follow Jesus' way of life, Not just checking a box and say, I went to Mass or I prayed my rosary and it only took me 5 minutes this time. No. No, he wants our hearts, and we have to radically follow in this way of loving him and receiving his love. Let him transform us and convert us, all of us, so that we can help bring others into heaven, including our families. So when we talk about, Father, how can I really evangelize? I'm supposed to be a missionary disciple. I'm supposed to bring people to Jesus. That's overwhelming. That's for a priest or the saints or something. Wrong. Jesus chose fishermen. Ordinary, probably mostly uneducated, hardworking, blue collar. He chose them because he is the one at work through us. So I just say, start with those around you, your circle of influence, your families, your coworkers, your neighbors. Just concentrate on them. Concentrate on loving them and bringing them to heaven. Parents, you have a huge obligation. Lead your kids into heaven, into holiness, even if they're in high school. I remember my mom and dad said, you are going to Mass. It is Sunday. But I you want to live outside? No. What if I said, I didn't want to go to school? I don't want to go to school. What would parents say? Oh, okay, you can stay home. It's your free will choice. At the end of the day, parents, God will ask you on your judgment day, what did you do to help bring your kids into heaven? What's more important? There's a lot at stake. You make them go to Mass, quite frankly. They'll thank you for it later. I don't know where I'd be without my parents doing so. So start with your family, and husbands and wives, pray for each other each day. Love each other by praying for one another. It's so important to pray together. And I love our beautiful families here at St. Catharine. It's so great to see. Okay, that's the lesson today. Let's spread the good news, because it's a hurting world. It's a hurting nation. A lot of division. What can we do as followers of Jesus? Christ shows us the way. Let's follow him in our lives, truly be his disciples, and let's cast those nets. Let's go fishing, shall we? Let's bring people to Jesus. Christ says to you this morning, like he did those apostles, truly he says to you, come, follow me.